So these are just some of the photos that I've shot on my iPhone over the past few years. Longtime followers of the channel will know that the iPhone is the main camera that I use to take all of my photos and videos with, including all of the videos that you see on this channel, mainly because it's the device that I'm always carrying with me. So I like to think that I know a thing or two about shooting high quality photos on the iPhone. Obviously, Apple are constantly adding in new camera features and settings to the iPhone each year, and the changes can get quite overwhelming. So in this video, I'm going to break down the settings that I use to take high quality images on the iPhone. Before we get into it, I'm going to be using the iPhone 17 Pro Max in this video. Some other settings shown may vary between devices. However, as long as you have a recent Pro model iPhone, ideally an iPhone 14 Pro or newer, most of the settings should be similar. It may be the case that just one or two features are missing on older devices. So before we even begin shooting our photos, we'll want to make sure that we have the correct settings enabled to take the best quality pictures possible. So first we need to head into the settings app, into the camera section, and first up we have the camera control settings. So this is a button that was introduced with the iPhone 16 series last year. It gives you quick access to any of your chosen camera apps. So I have mine mapped to opening the regular camera app. Super useful if I ever need to quickly capture a picture in the heat of the moment. If we head back out, photographic styles tends not to be something that I mess around with. Essentially, these are just a series of built-in filters that you can shoot in to give your photos a certain look. Video, I've got that set to 4K at 24 frames per second. They say that shooting in 24 FPS gives your video a more cinematic look, so that's why I use that. And the rest of the settings I haven't really changed. If we head into formats, so this is where we're going to want to pay the most attention. So we're going to set our photo mode to 24 megapixels. So when we're shooting standard images, the camera will default to 24 megapixels instead of 12, giving us a high resolution image. And then this is the most important setting when it comes to taking high quality photos. We're going to want to enable ProRAW and resolution control. Shooting in ProRAW is going to enable to capture photos at the full 48 megapixel resolution of our iPhone's camera, so we can get the highest quality image possible. And it will also preserve more details in areas like the highlights and the shadows of our image, so that when we come to editing our photo later on, we'll be able to manipulate exact settings like the contrast and the tone and saturation of certain colors. Another advantage of ProRAW is that it also enables you to strip out the standard processing that Apple likes to apply to its images, so we can apply our own look instead. So you'll often notice that when you take regular pictures on your phone, the images have this weird over-sharpened and sometimes overexposed look to them. That's essentially Apple's on-device algorithms trying to apply its own look to your photo. I know some people out there like the sharpened look, however, I'm personally not the biggest fan of it. I think it looks a bit too unnatural. So by shooting in ProRAW, we'll be able to import our image into an app like Lightroom and make our own adjustments. If you have an iPhone 16 Pro or later, you can also play around with the ProRAW format. So you've got three different options: JPEG lossless, which offers the highest quality, however it does take the most space. I think about 75 megabytes per image, which can rack up if you're taking a lot of these images. As a second option, you've got JPEG XL lossless, which takes up about half the space, while still preserving most of the quality. And then finally, you've got JPEG XL lossy, which uses around 75% less storage with a very small loss in quality. Personally, I tend to shoot all of my photos in JPEG XL lossy, mainly because I don't want my photos taking up all of the space on my iCloud drive. And I don't think that the extra quality you get by shooting in lossless is worth the extra storage cost. You know, I'd only shoot in lossless if you were planning to blow up your image as like a physical wallpaper or something like that. Another thing I'd also highly recommend doing is heading into preserve settings and toggling on all of these options, especially ProRAW. This just means that every time you open up the camera app, the app will remember all of your settings so that you don't have to go and repeat them each time. And then right below under composition, I'd highly recommend turning on the grid and level. So this is going to enable us to properly frame our subjects and make sure our camera is properly leveled when taking photos. Now that we have our settings done, we can head out into the camera app. The camera app that I use is just the standard iPhone camera app. I found that it has everything that I personally need. Obviously, there are of course other camera apps that allow you to adjust exact settings like the ISO and shutter speed and the white balance. However, I'm personally not too interested in messing around with those settings. I just want to quickly be able to get out my phone and quickly capture a photo. So we have the camera app open. You'll notice that the design looks a lot different with the new iOS 26 update. That's because Apple have redesigned it in order to, in theory, make everything more simple. Although you could debate as to whether they've actually done that. So to move between your different camera modes, you now just swipe left and right. To be honest, I tend not to mess around too much with features like portrait mode, mainly because I feel like the blur you get doesn't feel very natural. I feel like the OS does too hard of a job at trying to separate the subject and the background, and it doesn't look very convincing to me. I also find that the regular camera does a decent job at giving you a shallow depth of field in certain situations. I'll show you an example on screen. You can see that when I bring an object like this iPhone Air close to the camera focuses in on that object and blurs out the rest of the background, just like how a proper mirrorless camera would. And if you tap on this button in the top right, you'll be able to access all of your old controls like the exposure and the aspect ratio settings. And if you want, you can toggle on and off Pro RAW here as well. So let's say that you needed to quickly take a picture of, say, I don't know, a document that somebody's given you. So in those instances, it is useful to be able to quickly change the format and resolution. You'll see at the bottom we also have this 1x button here. This allows us to switch between our iPhone's lenses and to digitally zoom in on an image. So on the Pro model iPhones, you can pick between 3 different lenses. So there's the 0.5x ultra-wide lens, the 1x lens, and the 4x telephoto lens. All of these lenses will shoot at the full 48 megapixel resolution on the new iPhone 17 Pros. However, I find that the 1x lens, because it has the largest sensor, and because it's the sensor that Apple spent the most time refining over the years, generally takes the best photos, especially in low light environments. So because of that, I tend to shoot the majority of my photos using the 1x lens. However, feel free to experiment with the lenses as you wish. The only warning I'd give is that you'll want to stick to the 3 lenses that Apple's given you. A common mistake I see a lot of regular users make is they'll try and digitally zoom in on an image when there's a subject that's far away. The reason this is a bad idea is that you're essentially digitally cropping in on a 48 megapixel image and losing some of that detail. So if you wanted to shoot at, say, 5 times, rather than zooming in at 5 times on your phone, just use the 4 times lens, take the photo, and then afterwards in the Photos app, you can zoom in on the image if you need to. Now, some of you might have noticed that my phone also has a 2 times and an 8 times option. And if I tap on the 1x lens, you'll see that it also jumps to 1.2x and 1.5x. And you might be wondering where these extra lenses have come from, given that there are only 3 cameras on the back of this phone. Essentially, Apple have this thing that they call optical zooming, which just uses some fancy machine learning technology to take a 48 megapixel image at 4 times and zoom in on that to get a 12 megapixel image when on 8 times. Whereas if you were to simply shoot at 4 times and then zoom in to 8 times afterwards in the Photos app, you'd end up with a slightly worse result. If any of that sounds confusing, just follow the basic rule of never zooming in on an image and only stick to the lenses shown on screen. Okay, so that's the camera section done. Now let's get on to actually editing the photos to get the look that we want. So my main editor of choice is currently Adobe Lightroom. The main reason that I use Lightroom is because it syncs all of my photos across all of my main Apple devices, like my iPad, my Mac, and my iPhone. And because of how long Lightroom's been around, it's really easy to find tutorials on how to edit online. I also find that Lightroom is pretty easy to use when it comes to editing. The interface is fairly intuitive, especially on the iPad, where you can make use of the Apple Pencil to make small adjustments. And I of course have my presets. I'll leave a link to the presets in the description below if anyone is interested. I'm currently running a 50% sale on them this month. They're not required, of course. The presets just help me to quickly get a look that I like without having to spend ages playing around with exact settings. So I can just apply my preset onto a photo and it's ready to go. So to show you an actual example, I've got a picture here of a coastline at golden hour that was taken during one of my recent trips to Europe, and I've applied one of my travel presets to it. Golden hour is the time around sunrise and sunset that a lot of photographers like to shoot at because the lighting from the sun allows you to get a really natural and smooth looking image. One thing I've actually done with this preset is I've desaturated a lot of the colors, like the blues. A common mistake I see a lot of people make is they'll just rack up the saturation like it's no man's land, which I find doesn't always look the most natural, and it's not really the look that I'm trying to go for. For me personally, I prefer photos that look a bit more subtle, as opposed to images you'd see in a holiday magazine. One effect I also like to add is lens correction to my images, so this just corrects for any distortion that may have occurred. Next up, we've got another coastline picture, but this time it's taken during the day. I really wanted to give this photo an old school look, so what I did was I applied preset 4 from my travel pack. So essentially what this preset has done here is it's reduced some of the contrast in the image by raising the shadows and reducing the highlights to give it that old school film look. You know, if you think about how an old vintage camera would have worked, the sensors, because of their size, wouldn't have been able to capture a whole lot of dynamic range. That's why when you watch older movies, you'll notice that the footage actually doesn't have a lot of contrast to it. And we can easily recreate that same look in Lightroom using these color curves. I've also added in some film grain to this image as well to accentuate that vintage look. Just make sure not to overdo the grain. I find that when it's above 50%, it does look a bit weird. Okay, so for our next image, we have an indoor shot of the iPhone 17 Air. This might actually be the thumbnail that I select for my review, which may or may not be out depending on when you're watching this video. But yeah, I've applied this Midnight Noir preset from my Studio Collection pack. Now, one effect I've played around with here is the color wheels. If you've ever used tools like Final Cut Pro before, this might be familiar to you already. Essentially, it just lets us adjust the colors of the highlights, midtones, and shadows. So the highlights are the bright part of an image, anything that's white or similar, and the shadows are the darker parts of the image, so black colors or similar. And one of the common edits I'll make is just adding some teal to the shadows and orange to the highlights. They say there's actually some science out there which shows that the orange teal color combination is actually one of the most pleasing to look at for the human eye, which is why Michael Bay used to use it a lot in his films. It's actually an effect that I've applied to the A-roll of this video, so I might actually show you that so you can see the before and after and the difference. But yeah, when I tap and hold onto the image, you can see the difference that this has made. And you know what? I think I might actually use this as the thumbnail for my review. That looks really good. Next up, we have this picture of a random street lamp, which at first sight doesn't look very special. Essentially, the main change I've made here was just racking up the temperature to give it that warm look. I wanted to go with an old school sort of New York City, Wall Street vibe, which I actually think we did a pretty good job at achieving. And then I've also added in some fake background blur as well to the image. Obviously, a big limitation of iPhone cameras is that because of how small the sensors are, it's quite difficult to get that natural bokeh when you're looking at objects that are far away. You might be wondering how I've managed to do it in this video. Long story short, I've just created a fake Gaussian blur inside of Final Cut Pro to mimic the bokeh effect. However, Lightroom does have an option that lets you try and artificially replicate the background blur. You get some mixed results with it in my experience. However, in this instance, it's worked pretty well. I think the key is to just not overdo it. You know, don't max out the blur to 100%. Make it more subtle at like 30 to 60%. And then for our final image, another street photography picture of a telephone box here. So obviously I've made sure to crop this image so that the box is in the center. There's a basic rule in photography called the rule of thirds, which says that you should ideally try and place the main subjects of an image along one of the vertical or horizontal grid lines that I told you to add in earlier. You can obviously break these quote-unquote rules as and when you like. However, I would highly recommend sticking to them if you're a beginner, because it just makes your image look more pleasing to the eye when it's framed properly. However, in terms of what this preset is actually doing and the mechanics behind it, the main thing here is our color adjustments to the oranges and the yellows, which are making the reds pop a bit more. And then I've also upped the whites and highlights to make the walls behind stand out. And comparing their before and after, you can see these are overall very subtle changes. So that's a quick run through of the main tips and tricks that I use to take high quality pictures on my iPhone. I think the main one is getting those color adjustments right at the end, because you can take a photo that looks pretty bad and recover it through good editing. I'll of course leave a link to my presets in the description below if you're interested. These are presets that I've designed specifically for ProRAW images shot on the iPhone. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful. Make sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter and subscribe for the next one.